recently spent some time with Craig Arnold at the Kansas City Woodcraft store. Craig is known as a craftsman who really understands wood finishes, and I can use all the help I can get.
One of the things about finishing that I always tell my students in class is that people buy finishing. They don't care about mortise and tenon joints or dovetails. But they buy what they like to look at and what they like to touch.
I understand what you're saying.
And so finishing is, to me, what's key to a great furniture. In fact, for me, finishing starts at the lumberyard. Picking out good wood.
Okay.
And I'm always conscious of grain direction. I'm conscious of grain run out on boards, so I don't want a lot of grain running off the boards.
Okay.
I want something that's pretty evenly grained, or with dramatic cathedrals, I want to make sure that I can capture that. So for me, finishing starts at the lumberyard.
I got you.
And all the best boards become the top of my pieces. And the next best boards become the doors and drawer fronts. And then all the other stuff that's left over become the sides and the frames and all that.
Okay.
And so once I get it all laid out and I cut my boards to size, I'm going to have a few boards left over. And those are excellent boards to become test boards.
And these are test boards.
This is some walnut that we're going to be working on today.
Nice.
When I say this, lightning may strike, but I think American walnut that's been killed dried is very ugly wood. So,
What do you mean by that? Explain.
Well, when the sawyer cuts a tree down, a walnut tree, he'll put it in a kiln to dry it.
Right.
But they pump steam into this kiln, and that steam bleaches the heartwood color out into some of the sapwood. So it does give the sawyer more sellable wood, but it really takes a lot of the color out of the wood.
It doesn't have a lot of richness to it right now.
It loses its richness.
You know, you can definitely see it's really pale in color.
Yes, and that is indicative of kiln-dried American walnut.
All right.
So.
And what do you got here? You got some samples.
Yeah, I make up these sample boards for customers, and generally we'll put like a dye stain down first, and then put different pigment stains on top. And where the dye stain will give an undertone of color, then I can use the pigment stain to accentuate the grain, push the color one way or another.
So dye stains and pigment stains.
Yeah, so a dye stain is going to color the wood fairly evenly all the way across.
What would be an example of a dye stain?
Like the General Finishes can there, in the orange one, right there. And so this dye stain.
It says dye stain right on it. Yeah. Even without my glasses, I can read that.
And so they color the wood fairly evenly.
Okay.
Where a pigment stain, like a gel stain or a liquid stain.
This is a gel, okay.
Those have two coloring components. They have large pigments, and then they have the dyes.
Okay.
The pigments are earth mined. They're dug up out of the ground, where the dyes are man-made to complement or match the color of the pigment stain.
All right.
Those dyes in that will also color the wood, but the real punch of the color from a pigment stain comes from the pigments lodging in the pores of the wood.
Okay.
So where you have early growth and late growth, the early growth, big pores, lots of water, it's growing fast in the spring, those pigments will lodge in there and really provide the punch of color.
Because it absorbs more.
Right. Where the adjacent wood is the late growth. Very few pores in there. There's a few, you can see them.
It's a lot tighter grain.
Yeah. And that's where the dye is primarily coloring the wood.
Okay.
So where people want to really accentuate that, I always recommend a pigment stain. Where they're afraid, I don't want to see that contrast between the early growth and the late growth. They just see the grain. I don't want to see that grain. Well, then I'd recommend a dye stain, because it's going to be fairly even color across the whole board. So like on these boards, I've started with a dye stain first to give an undertone of color.
Which is across the whole board.
Across the entire board.
Yep.
Then I've come back with different pigment stains, and those pigments are what's lodging in the pores of the wood. And that way, if they have something more in mind toward the reddish brown or the more orange color, here's one that's a little more red. There's more down here, which is really yellow. There's actually a stickly finish that is a bright yellow underneath.
Oh, okay.
And here we use honey amber color to get that undertone of color.
And you write your...
Yeah, and all the information's written on the back of what's on here.
That's awesome.
And so that way I keep these, and when somebody does want to see a piece of furniture, Okay, we've got the furniture, now let's pick out the finish. I can show them these boards. This is a few of the ones I have. They can pick one out and say, ooh, I like that. So I'll prepare a bigger board for them, and so that way there should be no surprise what the colors are going to look like.
And I would think that's pretty important for custom furniture, right?
Oh yeah, because I'll ask them to put this board right in the position where it's going to be in their home, the right lighting, and oh, it's a little too dark now. Okay, great, I can lighten that up. Or can you make it a little darker because it's way out here in the sunlit room, it really stands out, darken it. So yeah, I can darken it then.
Man, I love that level of detail of the craftsmanship, right? It's really, you're thinking so far in advance, where it's going to live, how it's going to be used, how the light's going to be on it. That's pretty cool.
And at that point, I have not even begun to cut the lumber up for their project. They approve this part first.
Okay, that's smart.
Well, often, if there's a door with a raised panel, that raised panel, if you finish it all together, that panel will shrink when it dries in the winter.
Right.
And you'll see unstained wood on the sides, where in spring it'll grow and it'll go away. Well, you can see that unstained wood from a block away.
Yeah.
Where at least if you pre-colored it before you assembled it, then you're not going to have that glaring white line of unstained wood under there.
So what do you do about your glue up areas though?
Just tape it off.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty easy. I mean, most of my glue joints and something like that is just a simple mortise and stub tenon. And so it just put a piece of tape around the tenon and go to town. So just a couple wraps of blue tape and you're off and going.
That's smart.
It's pretty easy.
And then what's this here?
Well, this is paint. Not every person likes painted furniture, but like at my house, we have an accent piece by the front door where we hang the keys and put the mail, and that's where the important stuff goes for the day. And it just happens to be painted. This example shows 2 layers of paint. We're sanding through.
Yep.
Can expose the bottom layer of paint. Here, this was actually done with Vaseline. You put Vaseline on top of the bottom color, put the second color on top of the Vaseline, and as this top color begins to dry, you just wipe off that paint.
Okay.
And it just takes off. So it gives it kind of a real quick and easy way to show a little bit of age and wear.
Yeah, and like a rough edge to it, as opposed to a sanded edge,
Right. And so I tell my students in class that, not the whole piece isn't going to be this way, but perhaps where the doorknob is, I open this door to put the mail in this little box, that's where the wear is going to occur.
Right.
And so I can really emphasize that wear on there. This one also has some crackle technique where I put down black first, and then after it's dried, I lay down hide glue, the old-fashioned hide glue.
Okay.
Let it dry. And then the third coat of product on here is this orange paint. And where I overwork the paint, I will get fine crackle closer together. Where I just put it on, I'm done, I will get thicker crackle further apart.
And that's from the hide glue causing that?
And that's from the hide glue. Yeah.
Wow.
And the tension, the surface tension causes that. And this, if I start up here and I'm doing this, by the time I'm done here, this is already starting to take place.
Really?
Yeah. It happens that fast.
Because I know they sell like additives and things like that.
Yeah.
That you
Well,
can use.
there's generally a coating that you put on between the layers.
But hide glue will do it.
Yeah, but hide glue will do it as well. That's what they've used for years.
That's super cool.
Centuries.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Nothing in finishing is really new.
No.
It's been done before.